Good day and welcome to another episode of the Under the Spell podcast series, where we're going to be discussing the latest book, The Spell, with various thought leaders to get their opinions and thoughts on this brand new book. And I'm very excited that today I'm joined by Zolile Zikode, who's a real human being and people thought leader here at Monocle. And you've been given the privilege, if I can call it that, to read the book before anyone else does. And it's been very interesting discussing with you leading up to this, your thoughts on the book, how you found it. And I'm glad you enjoyed it as much as I did. I guess to start, if you had to try sell this book to someone and explain why they should go and read it, what would you say to them?
Thank you, Steve. I was privileged enough to get the opportunity to read the manuscript, so before the book was actually published. And I'd say in summarizing the book, I'd say it's about how humans make sense of themselves by telling stories. The authors trace Western thought from the ancient Greeks through the Enlightenment to the present day, showing how politics, religion, science, and even pop culture are all different attempts at answering the same question, which is, what does it mean to be human? So I'd say if you are someone who's curious about understanding why we believe the things that we do, if you're curious about why societies repeat certain mistakes and why stories carry so much power in shaping human destiny, this book will really give you a big picture narrative, but it's one that is told very vividly and sometimes in a very haunting storytelling style.
Absolutely. And I think it really is those stories are enlightening in a way. They're snippets into our history and snippets into our existence as human beings. And I know, I'm very jealous that you've got to study people. And so you get kind of like, you're coming from a place where you've got a deep understanding of how the human brain works. Do you feel like, in some ways, this book's helped you to further your understanding as to what human beings are and how we tick?
So one of the most strongest threads that you see in the book about how human beings are always trying to understand human beings is how every era seems to create new frameworks, new stories, new methods to understand ourselves and make sense of ourselves. So whether it's through philosophy or science or religion or myth, human beings are always trying to understand themselves. And this is a continuous chase that is ever evolving. So to a certain extent, I do feel like I understand human beings better, but there's just so much more. I think the one takeaway for me was that in your efforts to try and understand human beings and human behavior, it's important to not only look at isolated facts or events, but look at the stories that we tell about ourselves. Stories that both explain why we behave the way that we do and also shape how we behave.
Absolutely. And throughout history, it's ultimately people and their decisions that have steered the course of civilization. And it's quite fascinating to go through some of those different stories that David and Robin have laid out in the book. And you see how, often people try and make these decisions with the right intentions or believing they understand the broader context and situation, but sometimes they're unforeseen consequences. Are there any stories that you found particularly impactful when you're looking at how people have shaped the course of history?
It's a striking theme throughout the book, how seemingly small decisions can ripple outward into history with global impact. One of the biggest examples was musician Bob Geldof, who, after seeing a harrowing BBC broadcast on the Ethiopian famine, he decided to do something about it. He decided to help the starving people of Ethiopia, first by the recording of Do They Know It's Christmas, and also the Live Aid concerts. And the impact, was that within months, the initiative had raised millions of dollars, and it also mobilized unprecedented global attention on famine relief. Another example was of Dr. Li Wenliang, who's a doctor in Wuhan. He was suppressed by authorities when he tried to warn his colleagues of what seemed to be a strange new virus, which we later knew as COVID-19. And the impact of that was, had his early warnings been heeded, the pandemic could have been slowed. Instead, the suppression contributed to a global health crisis that's resulted in millions of deaths, lockdowns, and trillions in economic losses.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating. And, this book really shares a breadth of different types of stories to help us to better understand kind of these opposing narratives that we've seen in our history. And I guess I wanted to ask you, as someone who's studied behavioral psychology, why do you think we do live in such polarized times?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Steve. I think polarization is a product of several psychological, social, political, and structural forces that reinforce each other. Over time, there's been an erosion of shared moral frameworks, which leaves people searching for belonging in different or opposing camps. There's individual drivers as well, emotional drivers such as fear. And there's human beings' natural inclination to split the world into us versus them. These are all the individual drivers that contribute and are, of course, amplified by other political, social, economic, or structural forces.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think it's almost accentuated these days with the likes of social media. And it becomes so much easier to as they say, have confirmation bias. You'll go and seek out the information that confirms what you already believe, instead of having constructive conversation. And I think that's something that this book certainly helps with, is providing some stories to facilitate conversation like we're having now.
I think it's definitely multi-layered. We see in the book how historical wounds from famine and wars continue to split societies even today.
Yeah. And Zoe, when we were talking before this, we both commented on the way that David and Robin wrote this book, where it's not necessarily chronological, and the chapters do jump between quite distinct different fields. How did you find that as a reading experience?
I think the flow of the book is definitely unique. It's not something that I'm used to. And I remember speaking to David about it when I was still about halfway through the book. And he was telling me, just be patient, it'll all come together eventually. And I now realize, having completed the book, I now realize that the non-linear style is actually a reflection of reality. It moves between different eras and between philosophy, religion, science, pop culture, politics, which keeps the reader engaged. I think it fits into the book's central argument that human beings are not linear. Human behavior is not linear progression, but these narratives overlap quite often, and it's due to culture, belief, and chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, in order to try and understand this world, you have to have that diversity of content in a book like this. You wouldn't be able to get into the same level of understanding if it was just a book written about history or just a book written about philosophy. Out of all these different kind of facets, the science, the history, the even economics and finance, was there a particular field that you felt like you really learned a lot of in this book?
Yeah, so I must say I actually enjoyed the multidisciplinary approach, bringing together the philosophy, the science, the religion, the history. I found it refreshing, and I was able to draw lessons from different disciplines. One example for me was I have a special interest in religious studies, so it was just interesting to see how beliefs can drive one or influence acts of great compassion or acts that are of catastrophic cruelty. One example is of the Irish famine, where mass starvation was justified by belief, by saying that it's a form of divine punishment instead of a crisis that needed attention and that needed to be solved. Another interesting observation for me was how power dynamics and political struggles have been constants across history. What seems to change is the stories that are used to justify it. So whether it's divine rights or scientific truth or economic necessity, at the end of the day, power is always about control at the expense of humanity. And we see this, with the Live Aid, where millions were raised for famine relief, and most of these funds were misused by the regime to consolidate power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, history repeats itself. There's so many lessons and learnings for us in what other people have already experienced. I mean, going all the way back to the ancient philosophers who are grappling with some of the same issues that we're still grappling with today. And I think by going on that journey through this book, looking at all those different stories and different topics, kind of challenges us to try and face our own understanding of the world and just think a little bit more critically about it.
Yeah.
So Zoe, it's been a pleasure to be able to chat to you about this book. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations about it as we go. And to everyone else, please go out, get the book. It's available at all major retailers, and hopefully you get as much out of it as Zoe and I did. Thank you very much, Zoe.
Thank you for the opportunity, Steve.